Alafia, my dear seekers and darklings. I may be late, but it is better to be late than to do this after the year has ended and a new one has begun. So let's discuss the last full moon of the year. Let's talk about the full moon in Cancer. Let's start at the beginning, right? Full moons are an opposition between the sun and the moon. In this case, if the moon is in Cancer, that means, if you do the math, if you know how to look at the wheel, that the sun is therefore in Capricorn, right? Now, what is the choice that we are having to make at this time? Because oppositions point to choices, represent choices that we have to make between one thing and another. On the one hand, we have our emotional histories, our connections to family, our connections to home in a more emotional sense. And on the other hand, progress, career growth, reputation, relationship to authority figures, older people in our lives. So at the basis, at the foundation, this full moon is very much about having had to make a choice between home, family, emotional histories, emotional comfort on the one hand, shining professionally, improving our relationships with authority figures, with older people, improving on our reputations, even enjoying our careers, right? Having fun with things related to career, reputation, also history, but history in a more structural, disciplined, limited sort of way. Not so much emotional, sentimental, like, the moon in Cancer. Now, that being said, there is, of course, a context surrounding this full moon, as there always is in every lunation. But the context this time, interestingly enough, is that there's a kite, much like there was a kite when there was a full moon in Taurus, if memory serves. And I think it happened again with the new moon in Scorpio, but I digress. There's a kite, right? Which means that there is still a grand dirty trine. All the earth signs are involved. Sun in Capricorn, Jupiter in Taurus, Lilith in Virgo, grand dirty trine. And then that opposition I mentioned between the sun and the moon, give it that little diamond shape. That kite means that although there is this representation of having to pick or find a way to compromise, right, between those two polar opposites that I mentioned, it definitely leans heavier in the direction of that sun in Capricorn. It is a lot easier to act upon the themes of that sun in Capricorn than it is on the moon, even though the moon is connected to the other placements by sextiles, which means opportunities. If we make the right choices, if we take the right perspective, we can apply the matters of the moon. But now here's the thing, right? If you, much like many people around the world, you decided to spend Christmas, especially in this case, because the full moon proper was the 27th. So this is about Christmas Eve, and the 2 or 3 days after. If you chose to emphasize family, if you chose to emphasize emotional comfort, emotional history, you might have found that you had to make professional sacrifices in order to make that work, in order to make that happen. If you, on the other hand, chose to take a safer approach to career and reputation and relationship to elders and so on, your connection to family members, home, or even your sense of emotional comfort is where you saw sacrifices. This kite, however, unlike the other kite that we saw at previous lunations, is part of a bigger shape, right? In this case, this is not what traditionally would be called a bucket because it's actually more of a pentagon. But still, it's a larger shape. There are also connections here to Saturn in Pisces. Saturn, which is just entering the sign of Pisces, which it's going to be in for 2.5 years. And I mentioned the kite, right? So Sun in Capricorn, Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Taurus, the Moon in Cancer, Lilith in Virgo. That's the whole pentagon. There's also, an ongoing sextile between Pluto and Venus that is very curious. But let me not skip steps, right? The larger shape forms a sort of recipient. It kind of draws a container in the sky that normally, astrologically, we would interpret this as a container for cosmic energies coming in. And they would be coming in from whatever the center point of the container would be. In this case, Jupiter and Taurus. So energy coming in from the Scorpio side of things. But right around that Scorpio side of things, the middle of that container shape is the South Node in Libra, which gives it a different direction. It's less of I am putting this container to catch cosmic energies coming in, and it is more of yeet of cosmic energy towards Scorpio, Libra. We already spent a whole year with the South Node in Scorpio, right? So trying to be less intense in relating to other people, trying to depend less on other people's finances in order to, right, stand on our own 2 feet, trying to be less emotionally dependent on other people, for some of you, trying to be less hypersexual even. We already did or should have already done the work when it comes to that. And have since moved on to now we're trying to be more assertive, be more independent, act on our initiative and on our instincts more, and put less emphasis on trying to always be so nice, trying to always be so polite, trying to always be so, serving, right? Because those 2 signs, Aries and Libra, are the signs of self and other, respectively. And the South Node in Libra with the North Node in Aries, in that sense, gives a very clear, communicates a very clear message. More self, more me, less how can I help you, or less of like give you, serve you, and more of no, I'm standing my ground, I'm asserting myself, I'm doing things my way, or I'm doing things by myself even. I'm asserting my own interests, fighting for my own interests. And so mote it be, conjunct Chiron in Aries, it's asserting that we are worthy, that our needs and initiatives are worthy, even that our existence, our sense of self are worthy, even if this requires that we fight for it, that we compete for it, in spite of possibly years upon years of gaslighting, internalized trauma, and insecurity around it. Exactly that sort of theme. But that's not connected to the rest of the aspects. The aspects that are connected to each other speak more of, so one redundant theme is being stuck or being forced to move slower than we intend to, and we would like to, or than we want to. Okay? The first appearance of that theme is, I want to say precisely that kite includes both Jupiter retrograde in Taurus, with Lilith in Virgo. There's a theme and a sensation of embodying things right now, but embodying more because our physical bodies, our material possessions, our values sort of exist in this space, and it kind of just is. It takes up space because of the laws of physics more than our volition or our desires or our intention. It's, you know, your body simply exists without your permission. It doesn't require your permission to exist and occupy space. It's just a thing that it does. And that very much is something that's in there. But with Lilith and Virgo involved, there's very much an added implication of not only without our permission, but moreover, in many ways and in many things, against our consent even. We might find that some of the ways that we're existing, or some of the things that our bodies do at this time, are just things that we don't find practical, things that we don't find effective, things that we don't think are rational or analytically approve of, but they kind of just happen against our desires, against how we want to exist in the world. And it continues to be important. It's not as before, right? When we had an opposition between Lilith and Saturn, which they just barely got out of that aspect recently. But we're no longer dealing with, am I willingly, consciously, with discipline, choosing empathy, choosing consideration, choosing love of humanity, and avoiding, being critical in order to avoid introspecting or avoid recognizing my own, let's say, irrationality, my own lack of practicality, or how ineffective our use of language is, or whatever. We've moved on to a different territory. Now it's more of, I hope you developed better communication habits, because they're kind of just happening, running without you. You might want to continue to monitor them, or to filter them, or to analyze them, but they're kind of working and existing on their own. Having Mercury conjunct Mars in Sagittarius, which is its fall, doesn't really help, because this is also a time where there is likely to be a tendency to develop tunnel vision, hyper focus on something that catches our attention within communications, especially if those communications are arguments. There are fights, verbal fights, competition, or trying to assert ourselves using our words, using our rational thinking. But with Mercury transiting Sagittarius and conjunct Mars in Sagittarius, we might pour excessive focus on the wrong thing, on something that in the greater scheme of things doesn't actually matter. Or we might throw out the baby with the bathwater, and just trying to be right about one specific point, lose the larger argument because we obsessed over a detail that isn't fundamentally more important, or right, because we focused too much on the conclusion. Sagittarius can very much, being the sign of truth, can very much be about wanting a specific conclusion to be the outcome of certain communications, and then throwing the entire process of explaining things or teaching or sharing information, just throwing it out, as long as it doesn't take people to that conclusion, or aiming to get to that conclusion. If people arrive anywhere else, discarding the entire exchange, discarding the entire communication as worthless, as useless, as a waste, really. And as if, to add insult to injury, as if that was not hard enough, we have on top of that those two transits rather are forming a square to Neptune in Pisces, which makes it even likelier that we will pour 150% of our mental attention and our communicative focus into exactly the wrong thing. Because Neptune, and especially in the sign of Pisces, is by and large about delusion, about illusions, about mental illness, about fogginess, about missing the mark. And in trying to be verbally hyper precise to assert ourselves in a way that is honest, in a way that is authentic, and in a way that honors our truths, our philosophies, our religious stances, we might completely miss the point and end up communicating something wildly different to the point that we're trying to get across. There's also a funny little square between Venus and Saturn. It's hard to relate to people and stay disciplined in developing creativity, in developing intuition, our spiritualities, whatever shape and form those might take right now. Because in a lot of ways, they are at odds with each other right now. If we try to have intense, profound exchanges with people or relationships with people, in order to really go down that Venus and Scorpio path, we are probably going to sabotage whatever discipline we're developing on more Piscean areas of life, around intuition, around spirituality, around creativity, like I said, right? Possibly even, exploring and developing altered states of consciousness, right? Maybe some of you are trying to learn how to consistently lucid dream. You might find that hanging out with friends got in the way of you practicing on your lucid dreaming around these nights, or that trying to be together with friends and family because holidays and whatever gets in the way of some creative, intuitive, or spiritual process that you need to be practicing in order to pick up or get better at. And conversely, right, that it's really hard to have satisfyingly deep and private relationships with other people while maintaining that practice, while maintaining that discipline during these days. What else do I want to talk about that I see here? So I talked about there being a greater theme of wanting to do certain things at a certain pace or in a certain way, and many things in the transit chart making it look like you're not going anywhere, or that's going to go a lot slower than you want. And I already mentioned that one appearance of that is Jupiter retrograde in Taurus. Another appearance of that is precisely that Mercury is also retrograding. And conjunct Mars, we definitely want to find the right words, want to find the right ideas, want to find the right ways of making small trips, but we are likely to instead have a lot of impatience and a lot of anger in the process of trying to say things, think things, get to places with precision, and failing to hit the mark over and over and over and over and over. Okay? We might also be frequently trying to get either from one side of the house to the other, or from one building to the one next door, or to the end of the block, short distances. And these trips would maybe normally take seconds, couple minutes. And during these days, you might find that you have extra reasons to want to hurry to make those little trips even faster, and find that instead the opposite is happening and it's taking twice as much, 3 times as much, or even that you need to make that small trip and you end up not being able to go anywhere. This is very much what happened to me these days and why I'm posting this so late. I full on got sick. I have a bit of a running joke because I rarely, very, 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 very rarely ever get sick. And I have this running joke that I kind of just get sick once a year, like I have a quota. Well, my quota illness for the year landed on pretty much exactly this full moon. I was battling an illness every day since almost exactly a week ago. Wednesday, Thursday, more or less. And around the time of the full moon was peak. I literally, in fact, couldn't even walk. I wasn't able to leave my apartment, because leaving my apartment and leaving the building, in my case, means going down 8 flights of stairs, because I need to go down 4 floors and there's no elevator. And I woke up with such intense lower back pain, specifically if I tried to walk, that I literally had to spend the 26th and the 27th, pretty much the entire days here. Couldn't even go anywhere. So yeah, that's the second appearance of the whole "you're not going anywhere" or slow, way down, and review instead. You've probably gotten a lot further these days, or you've probably had much more productive activity if your focus has been instead on, okay, I want to communicate this idea, for example, or I want to understand this thing, for example. Instead of trying to force yourself to debate someone else and see if they arrived at the conclusion that you wanted them to get to, if you've dedicated these days to instead revising the ways in which you have debated in previous times, or that you've argued with people in previous times, that you've tried to think about things in previous times, you've probably gotten a lot more done. You've probably learned a lot more. You've realized a lot more about the way that you think, that you speak, that you make short trips. Don't expect to be more effective at those things yet, not anytime soon, but definitely, this week, I would expect us to be progressively realizing ways to be more effective later. Noticing the errors of our ways, okay? Another slow down or you're not going anywhere theme is precisely, that square between Venus and Saturn. There's something in there of like, unless you are honoring those aspects of other people's realities that you don't understand. Notice what I'm saying, right? Not honor those things that you understand and appreciate and either like or at least respect because they don't bother you. No. We've been straight up required to consistently and with discipline respect those aspects of people that we don't understand. I don't know how that is a part of your personality, but I will honor and respect it all the same, because it is just as much a part of you as those things that I do like or I do understand. That is kind of demanded of us this week. And similarly, doing that will require that we relate to certain people or that we form certain relationships, new relationships, in ways or with an emotional approach that is unsatisfyingly shallow. And it's gonna be uncomfortable and unpleasant either way. But I will say this, right? As a final note, in terms of returning to that opposition between the sun and the moon, that kite and that larger shape, a decent enough compromise that can be made is to not take major risks when it comes to reputation, career, relationship to elders, right? And not taking it further or not allowing ourselves to get more ambitious than that at this time. And, with that space that we make by not being extra bold, not taking that risk, not, trying to take over the world corporate style, with those pieces of time that we open up for ourselves, give it to people that we love, give it to home, give it to family, give it to emotional security. Because either way, it is also shaping up like it's going to be insufficient in both directions. But, the healthiest looking compromise for me is every hour, every half hour, every stretch of time throughout the day that you don't dedicate to greed and chasing after reputation, power, and money. Dedicate it to those that get you to feel safe, or that you have strong emotional bonds with, or to developing emotional bonds and emotional safety and comfort, and working on your home environment. Much like me, you might have even found yourselves in situations where you kind of didn't have a choice, where you kind of had to work on certain things at home because it was the only thing that you could do. I had to spend most of those days around the full moon vacuuming and mopping and tidying up and dusting, and because it was also part of my illness, I was like, okay, a lot of this is allergy symptomology, so let's remove allergens. You might have gone through something very similar where it's like, I want to be doing X, or I wish I was doing Y, Z, whatever. But I can't do that. The only thing that's available to me is home improvement. And hopefully you didn't fight it, you didn't bemoan your fate, and you just dug in. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you have learned many things in the process of me ranting about this. I hope that choosing to do this at a time in which I am inviting a certain level of spiritual mischief doesn't, sabotage my efforts, doesn't sabotage my discourse and my presentation, that you've been able to follow along. And with that, I say happy holidays, happy prosperous new year, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. Ashe.